My stepmother demanded that I pay rent to live in my own house, while her freeloading children stayed for free and treated me like a guest in my late father's home. My stepmother insisted I pay for my room in our own house, while her children resided there without charge. When I objected, she attempted to persuade my father to remove me. But once I revealed the true owner of the residence, everything shifted. Sandra's grin widened. Well then, you'll have to secure different living arrangements, won't you? We can't tolerate freeloaders in this home. I sat at the dining table, my meal utterly cold as Sandra's words lingered. The sheer unfairness of it all. Years of being treated like an employee, while her kids contributed nothing, and now this. Something within me finally snapped. So, let me understand, I stated, my voice surprisingly steady. James, who graduated college 2 years ago and spends his days playing video games, doesn't need to pay rent. Melissa, currently in her 3rd year of college and who has never done a single chore here, also avoids rent. But I do. I've decided my children don't need to pay while they're establishing themselves, Sandra replied, gently blotting her mouth with a napkin. A peculiar calm washed over me. Perhaps it was all those years of suppressed frustration, or perhaps it was simply the opportune moment for the truth to emerge. I felt a smile spread across my face, not the typical polite one meant to preserve harmony, but something distinct, something that caused Sandra's own smile to falter slightly. That's quite interesting, I remarked, leaning back in my chair. I won't be paying rent, because this entire house belongs to me. The ensuing silence was profound. Then James began to laugh, followed by Melissa's high-pitched giggle. Sandra also laughed, but with a noticeable edge of nervousness. What are you talking about? She inquired, still chuckling. This house is mine, I repeated, maintaining eye contact. Their laughter faded as they processed my statement. Sandra's face cycled through various expressions: amusement, bewilderment, disbelief, and finally, something akin to dread. That's absurd, she stammered, grabbing her phone. I'm contacting your father right now. Her perfectly manicured nails aggressively tapped the screen as she activated the speakerphone. The ringing seemed to resonate throughout the kitchen. Hello, my father's voice crackled through the speaker. David, Sandra's tone was taut, controlled. Ruby is telling some rather interesting tales about the house. She claims it's hers. That's not true, is it? The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like an eternity. When my father finally spoke, his voice was hesitant. Well, he cleared his throat. Actually, my in-laws placed the house in Ruby's name before they passed away. You didn't think you should mention that? Sandra practically shrieked. How could you not inform me of this? I didn't consider it important, my father replied feebly. It never seemed relevant. Not relevant? Sandra's face reddened. Not relevant that your teenage daughter owns our house? She ended the call before my father could respond, almost slamming the phone onto the table. The kitchen descended into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the refrigerator's hum. James and Melissa stared at me as if they'd never seen me before. Sandra was breathing heavily, clearly attempting to compose herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was artificially cheerful, but I detected a slight tremor. Well, she forced a laugh that sounded more like a sob. This has been a significant misunderstanding. Of course, you don't need to pay rent, Ruby. Let's just put this conversation behind us, okay? I had completely lost my desire to eat. Without a word, I rose and headed upstairs. As I ascended the steps, I could hear hushed whispers from below. Sandra's sharp tone mingled with James and Melissa's anxious voices. By 6 the following morning, I was already awake, gazing at the ceiling, contemplating how much had changed in just a few hours. Around 7, I heard movement downstairs, the familiar sound of Sandra preparing her morning coffee. I was about to go down for breakfast when I overheard her voice. David, you need to address this situation, she said, her voice low but intense. Your daughter can't. We just need to make her leave. I froze on the stairs, holding my breath. I know the house is hers, David, Sandra continued, frustration clear in her voice. But she's making things difficult. She no longer fits in here. She's becoming a problem. There was a pause. Even from where I was, I could sense my father's hesitation. But Sandra, it's her house. I can't just evict her. No one's talking about evicting her. Sandra's voice turned sweet, that syrupy tone she used for manipulation. We just need to guide her in the right direction. What about those out-of-state colleges she applied to? You could encourage her to attend one of them, tell her it would be beneficial for her independence. My stomach twisted when I heard my father's reluctant reply. Perhaps you're right, he said slowly. I'll talk to her about relocating for college. It might be better for everyone. I waited until Sandra ended the call, then calmly walked into the kitchen, keeping my face expressionless. I began pouring myself a bowl of cereal, feigning ignorance of what I'd overheard. James and Melissa entered shortly after, both appearing uneasy. Sandra was the last to arrive, still holding the phone. Good morning, everyone, she chirped, as if nothing had occurred the previous night. We all sat down, the only sounds being the crunching of cereal and the occasional clink of spoons against bowls. Then, as casually as if commenting on the weather, I stated, "Oh, and starting next month, all of you will have to begin paying rent." For a moment, the silence in the kitchen was so profound I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Sandra stared at me as if I'd spoken an alien tongue. James and Melissa froze, spoons midair, eyes wide, exchanging nervous glances. It was Sandra who broke the quiet, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You're jesting, right?" she asked, her voice almost childlike, desperately trying to maintain control of the situation. "No, Sandra, I'm not jesting." My voice was calm, but each word carried firmness. "You've resided here, without charge for years. It's time to contribute." She swallowed hard, attempting to regain her composure. "That makes no sense. We're a family, and we're not a family," I interrupted, my patience completely exhausted. "You made that abundantly clear when you demanded I pay rent while your children lived here, without lifting a finger. Now, everyone will be treated equally." James scoffed, trying to appear unconcerned, but his insecurity was evident. "This is absurd. I'm not paying anything." "Then you're welcome to locate another place to live," I shot back, meeting his gaze. Melissa, who typically avoided confrontations, finally spoke up. "I'm still in college. How do you expect me to afford rent? Perhaps you should have considered that before spending money on gatherings and expensive attire," I replied. "But don't worry, the rent will be reasonable. I can even assist you in finding employment." Sandra finally erupted, slamming her hand on the table. "You've completely lost your mind. This house has always been a home for all of us. I won't allow you to transform it into some ludicrous boarding house." I stared at her, unyielding. "Funny, hearing that from you, Sandra, because just yesterday I overheard you trying to convince my father to remove me from my own house. And you thought I wouldn't discover it." The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she was speechless. Melissa looked as though she might faint, and James stared at his plate, as if he wished to vanish. I was only trying to help you become more independent," Sandra stammered, attempting to mask her distress. "Oh, of course, independence. How kind of you to try to help me vacate the house my grandparents bequeathed to me, while you and your children continue to live here without paying a dime." She tried to speak, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Don't worry, I've already decided. You'll all have formal contracts if you wish to continue residing here. It will be on my terms." Sandra abruptly stood, trying to maintain a semblance of authority. "This is unacceptable. David would never permit this. Perhaps you should call him again and ask what he thinks. Or better yet, inquire what he'll do when I decide to remove everyone and sell the house." The shock on her face was almost gratifying. She knew I possessed the power to do precisely that, and the thought clearly terrified her. That night, confined to my room, I could hear muffled murmurs and arguments emanating from downstairs. Sandra was likely trying to devise a scheme to circumvent the situation. But what she didn't realize was that I was more than prepared to confront her. The next day, I called for a meeting. Sandra tried to refuse, but I made it clear she had no alternative. By 10 o'clock in the morning, we were all seated in the living room. "Sandra, James, and Melissa appeared uncomfortable, while I sat calmly, assured. "Here are the rental agreements," I stated, handing each of them a copy. "You have 1 month to decide if you wish to stay." Sandra took the paper with trembling hands, and as she read, her face grew progressively redder. "This is absurd. You can't do this." "Actually, I can. I own the house." James threw the contract on the floor, his face filled with irritation. "This is unfair. We're your family." "No, James, you're my stepmother and my half-siblings who treated me like a domestic worker for years. If you want to remain here, you'll pay like anyone else." The argument persisted for hours, but I remained steadfast. In the end, I made it clear there was no room for negotiation. Sandra finally realized she had no escape. But before leaving the room, she took one last jab. "You'll never have your father's support after this." I smiled, weary but resolute. "We'll see." In the days that followed, she attempted everything, manipulating my father, creating tension in the house, even trying to turn James and Melissa against me. But nothing worked. They all signed a contract, and the initial payment arrived the following month. The truth is, after years of being overlooked, I was finally in charge, and for the first time, I didn't care what they thought. I had the house, the authority, and most importantly, my peace of mind. They could now contend with reality. The months passed, and the strain within that house intensified. Initially, Sandra, James, and Melissa tried to act as if nothing significant had changed. They reluctantly made the first month's rent payment, seemingly believing I would soon alter my decision. But I didn't. The payments began to be delayed, first by a few days, then weeks. The explanation was always the same: unexpected expenses, mounting bills, temporary financial difficulties. But I knew it wasn't solely that. James no longer purchased his expensive games and spent more time secluded in his room. Melissa stopped flaunting new attire and rarely went out. And Sandra seemed to be deteriorating before my eyes. She appeared exhausted, her face drawn with deep, dark circles. So, I decided it was time to resolve the situation once and for all. On a rainy night, I gathered everyone in the living room. The atmosphere was heavy. My father sat on the couch, looking defeated, while Sandra stood with her arms crossed, attempting to maintain a pretense of superiority that no longer existed. James and Melissa, as usual, kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. "It's been 3 months since you've paid the full rent," I began, my voice calm but firm. "I could easily remove all of you." Sandra's eyes widened in outrage. "You would never do that." I looked at her coldly. "Don't underestimate how much I've tolerated. But look, I'll be fair. I won't charge my father rent, not because he can't pay, but because I know he's being manipulated. Out of respect for him, I'll exempt him from this responsibility." My father lifted his head, surprised, but remained silent. He knew I was correct. "Now, with you, Sandra, it's different," I continued, locking my gaze on her. "You've always treated me like a domestic helper here, dictating to me while your children never lifted a finger. So, I devised something equitable. You can continue living here, but instead of paying with money, you'll pay with labor. You'll clean the house, do the laundry, cook. You'll be the maid here." Sandra's face turned pale. She raised a hand to her mouth as if trying to stifle her despair. "You must be joking," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm not." My voice was firm. "And to make things perfectly clear, you will wear a maid's uniform. I want you in that black and white apron, hairnet on your head, the full ensemble. If you're going to work, do it properly." Sandra stood frozen for a few seconds, then, unable to restrain her tears, she turned to my father. "David, are you going to allow her to humiliate me like this?" My father looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "Dad, with all due respect, don't intervene. You know why I'm not charging you, but Sandra needs to account for what she's done." He sighed, lowering his head. Sandra remained there, quietly sobbing. Melissa watched her, pale, and James showed no reaction at all. Sandra left the room, defeated. The next morning, I went downstairs and found Sandra in the kitchen. She was wearing a maid's uniform, A simple black dress, a white apron tied around her waist, and a hairnet covering her hair. Her expression was empty as she mechanically wiped the counter. "Good morning, Sandra." I spoke naturally.
She didn't respond.
I grabbed a glass of orange juice and sipped it calmly. Then, as if by accident, I let the glass slip from my hand, spilling the juice all over the floor. "Oh, how clumsy of me. Could you please clean that up?" She stood still for a moment, then slowly. She knelt and began cleaning the floor with a cloth. But it didn't end there. At lunch, I made a point of sitting at the table and asking Sandra to serve me. "Sandra, put more sauce on my plate, and please don't spill it." She served me in silence, her hands trembling. I stared directly at her, savoring every second of that role reversal. It wasn't cruelty, it was justice. Later in the afternoon, I summoned Sandra to the living room. "Sandra, the living room windows are dirty. I want you to clean them now." She hesitated. "But it's already getting dark." I tilted my head. "I asked you to clean them, Sandra, or would you prefer to pay rent with money?" She turned red, bit her lips, and grabbed the cleaning supplies. As she climbed onto the stool to clean the windows, I looked at James and Melissa, who silently observed the scene. "You two could assist, you know, or would you prefer to sign new contracts with higher rent?" They quickly got up and disappeared into their rooms. Sandra continued cleaning in silence, and I sat there watching. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't joy, it wasn't malice, it was the certainty that I had finally brought order to things. And I don't regret it. Sandra received precisely what she deserved. My father made his choice, and I made mine. If anyone considers me cruel, let them think what they wish. No one endured what I did. Now I finally have tranquility, and I won't surrender that for anyone.